Here may sound like the opening scene of a high-budget Hollywood thriller. But this story isn't fiction. It happened. And its consequences reached far beyond the dust-choked roads of West Africa. Picture this. A stunning blonde woman steps out of a white UN-marked vehicle at a heavily fortified military compound in Burkina Faso. The midday sun blazes overhead, turning the red soil into a shimmering sea of heat waves. She's carrying what appears to be a crate of emergency medical supplies and wears the calm, angelic smile of someone who's here to save lives. Her credentials? Impeccable. Her French? Flawless, with the polished tones of someone educated in elite European institutions. Her story? That she's here to help children caught in a health crisis. To most, she looked like hope incarnate. But to one man, a war-hardened colonel whose instincts had been sharpened by years of coups, betrayal, and bloodshed, she looked like a mirage. A perfect illusion. One that arrived too precisely, spoke too cleanly, and offered too much without being asked. And when he dug deeper, he uncovered a truth that would send shockwaves through the region. This is the story of how a single question unraveled an international espionage operation, and how in a world of shifting allegiances, the most dangerous enemies often arrive wearing the mask of compassion. The compound was still settling from the morning convoy when the vehicle appeared on the horizon, its white body stark against the scorched orange of the Sahel. It rolled toward the gate, tires crunching over gravel, red dust coiling behind like smoke from a battlefield. Soldiers watched from behind sandbag fortifications, sweat trickling down their brows as the vehicle came to a halt. The heat was punishing, but the woman who stepped down seemed untouched by it, her appearance composed, her expression serene. Dr. Sarah Magnuson. She moved like someone who had never been denied entry. Someone who could walk through borderlines, checkpoints, and bureaucracies with the same smooth ease. Her hair was pulled back in a tightly braided style that blended military utility with feminine precision. Her uniform, standard-issue khaki worn by international aid workers, was spotless, but the way she wore it suggested training that no field medic would receive. In her hands, she carried a pristine crate marked Emergency Medical Supplies, UNICEF authorized, handle with care. It looked heavy, and she carried it with the kind of reverence one reserves for a sacred object. But as the day would prove, appearances can be weapons. Watching from beneath the shadow of the compound's command post stood Colonel Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't blink. He didn't move. At 38, Traoré had survived more betrayals than most men would ever witness. 3 coups, assassination attempts, and the slow, grinding decay of loyalty under foreign pressure. His eyes were the kind that searched for lies even in prayer, and what he saw now, what his gut whispered to him, was that this woman did not belong. It was her timing. That gnawed at him. Just 72 hours ago, Traoré had chaired a high-level meeting with only his most trusted advisors. The topic? Recent intelligence about covert surveillance operations in the Sahel. The room had been swept for listening devices, all phones surrendered at the door, no records, no leaks. Only 6 people had access to that briefing. And now, just days later, this woman had arrived with unrequested aid for a medical emergency that nobody on his side had reported. Coincidence? Traoré didn't believe in those. Not anymore. Dr. Magnuson approached the gate with poise, the kind that tells seasoned guards this isn't her first time walking into a tense environment with nothing but a smile and credentials. Her stride was deliberate, as if every step was measured against a mental playbook crafted through countless field operations. Her smile, soft, practiced, disarming, was the kind perfected in front of mirrors under the cold scrutiny of intelligence handlers. Bonjour, she called in elegant Parisian French. Je suis le docteur Sarah Magnuson, de la Coalition Internationale de Secours Médical. We received reports of a potential health crisis in this sector. We're here to offer immediate humanitarian assistance. The guards didn't move. Their eyes flicked between her and each other. Hands drifted unconsciously closer to their weapons. Something about her didn't sit right. Aid didn't just show up here, like not without layers of clearance requests and months of diplomatic wrangling. Yet here she was, polished, perfect, smiling. To some, she looked like salvation. To Traore, she looked like a puzzle with no wrong pieces. And that was exactly the problem. Emerging from the shadows, Traore walked toward the gate. His presence shifted the air. Soldiers straightened. Even Magnuson paused ever so slightly. There was weight in his gaze. Not hostility, but calculation. He studied her not as a soldier studies an enemy, but as a hunter studies unfamiliar tracks in familiar territory. When their eyes met, the temperature seemed to drop. She saw a man forged by war, unbending in his skepticism. He saw a woman cloaked in benevolence, but built like someone trained to disappear. "Doctor," he said finally, his voice calm yet commanding. The kind of voice that expected and always received obedience. "I am Colonel Traore. We weren't expecting medical assistance today." Her smile held, poised, professional. But behind the gleam of her perfect teeth, something shifted in her eyes. A flicker, a calculation, so subtle most would never catch it. But Traore did. "Colonel," she replied smoothly, "humanitarian crises don't always announce themselves in advance. When we received intelligence suggesting potential disease outbreaks in this region, we acted without delay. Every hour could mean lives lost." The word intelligence lingered in the air like gunpowder after a shot. It wasn't just a word, it was a warning. Traore caught it instantly and filed it in the growing dossier in his mind. Another crack in the wall of her polished story. "What intelligence exactly?" he asked, keeping his tone light, conversational. But his eyes stayed locked on hers, unmoving, unblinking. That's when it happened. Barely a second, less than a heartbeat, but a pause that didn't belong. Her brain recalibrated, her lips barely parting as her next words formed. It was the first real slip. "Reports from regional health monitoring stations," she said with practiced ease. "Increased cases of fever, respiratory distress, symptoms consistent with early-stage outbreaks of potentially serious infectious diseases. We brought mobile testing equipment and are prepared to begin screening immediately if you'll permit us access." Traore nodded slowly, feigning consideration. On the surface, everything she said made sense. The equipment, the credentials, the urgency, it all checked out. But it was too clean, too flawless. And Traore knew better than most that real aid work in West Africa was rarely clean. It was muddy, chaotic, desperate. "These health monitoring stations," he said finally, voice neutral. "Which specific facilities sent you these reports?" There it was again. The micro-hesitation. The imperceptible beat too long. "I'd need to check my documentation for the exact facility names," she said. "Colonel, the reports were routed through our coordination office in Ouagadougou. I can radio headquarters for the specifics if you'd like." But she didn't know what Traore knew. He had personal ties to every legitimate medical facility within 200 kilometers. Not one had reported anything remotely like an outbreak. No unusual illnesses, no increased traffic, no whispers on the ground. Her narrative, however refined, was based on information that simply didn't exist. Still, Traore didn't challenge her. Not yet. Not directly. Instead, he made a decision, one that would later prove pivotal. He would let the illusion play out, give her rope, observe. Because if she was who he suspected, she would reveal herself. They always did, eventually. "Doctor," he said at last, stepping aside, "we appreciate any assistance you can offer. We have a medical station inside. You may set up your equipment there. I'll assign someone to assist you." Relief washed over her face for a fleeting instant. Subtle. Momentary. The untrained eye would mistake it for simple gratitude. But Traore wasn't untrained. He saw it for what it was. the satisfaction of someone who had just cleared her first obstacle. A small victory in a larger mission yet to unfold. As they walked deeper into the compound, Dr. Magnuson kept the conversation light but informed, asking about regional population density, access to clean water, recent medical concerns, and logistical support for mobile screening stations. Her tone was perfect, her rhythm precise. Every question exactly what a legitimate humanitarian would ask. But Traore's attention was elsewhere. He saw her gaze scan the perimeter, not like a doctor concerned about sanitation, but like an operative cataloging tactical vulnerabilities. She didn't linger on the infirmary. She lingered on the radio tower, the armory, the exits. Her movements were deliberate, but cloaked in the illusion of casual interest. Her eyes spent just a bit too long on the satellite uplink station. She smiled a little too naturally when passing the watchtower. She was mapping the compound. Not for medical intervention, but for something else entirely. And Traore, ever the soldier in a land full of ghosts and shadows, was already preparing his next move. Because he knew with a certainty that years of betrayal had taught him that this woman's war had nothing to do with disease, and everything to do with deception. The way Dr. Magnuson carried her medical supply crate caught Traore's eye. It wasn't just the careful grip of someone transporting delicate instruments. It was protective, almost possessive, as though the crate contained something far more valuable than mere test kits and antibiotics. That instinctive caution spoke volumes, and Traore mentally filed it alongside the other growing anomalies. The compound's medical facility was humble, a clean but modest structure designed to meet the basic healthcare needs of military personnel and, occasionally, local civilians in emergencies. As Dr. Magnuson stepped inside, her gaze swept the room in what would appear to any casual observer as professional appraisal. But Traore noticed otherwise. Her attention lingered on more than just the layout. She was studying power junctions, communication panels, the lines of sight between the clinic and other critical points within the compound. "This will work perfectly," she announced, placing her crate with precise care atop the central examination table. "I'll need about an hour to set up our equipment and calibrate the testing devices. Would it be possible to begin screening your personnel this afternoon? Early detection is crucial for containment if we're dealing with an infectious agent." Traore nodded, masking his scrutiny with an expression of polite cooperation. He agreed to her timeline, all while noting how unusually eager she was to initiate her operations. Most legitimate medical missions required extensive preparation, logistical coordination, cultural assessments, liaising with local authorities. Yet she wanted to begin immediately. That kind of urgency pointed to an agenda more complex than the humanitarian narrative she was presenting. He assigned Sergeant Konate to assist her, an experienced officer known for his sharp observational skills and discretion. Traore instructed him to be helpful, even accommodating, but to observe everything with precision. Not just what Dr. Magnuson said, but what she actually did. Her tools, her behavior, the way she interacted with her environment. Konate was to notice all of it. Left to her own devices within the clinic, Dr. Magnuson began unpacking her supplies. Her movements were fluid, confident, those of someone well-rehearsed in the setup routine. Yet what Konate later reported to Traore painted a very different picture. She paid scant attention to the diagnostic kits on top of the crate. Instead, she spent considerable time with the lower compartments, where, hidden beneath gauze packs and labeled vials, lay compact electronics. These weren't medical devices. She handled small, sophisticated equipment with deliberate care, assembling pieces that bore the unmistakable signature of advanced communication hardware. Though she took precautions to shield her work from obvious scrutiny, Konate had the angle and the awareness to notice. The most telling moment came when she spent nearly 20 minutes adjusting a particular device. No larger than a shoebox, matte black, embedded with what appeared to be multiple antenna arrays. It didn't resemble any diagnostic equipment he'd ever seen. To Konate, and later to Traore, it was clearly built for transmission, not treatment. While Dr. Magnuson worked in silence, Traore conducted his own investigation from his command office. He began verifying her story, not through surface-level documentation, but through the international intelligence networks he'd cultivated over the years. On paper, everything checked out. The International Medical Relief Coalition was indeed a recognized global aid organization. Dr. Sarah Magnuson's name was listed among their personnel. Her degrees from the University of Stockholm were authentic, and her resume included legitimate deployments with various humanitarian efforts across conflict zones and disaster regions. But Traore had long since learned that the most effective lies weren't outright fabrications. They were truths carefully chosen, arranged, and deployed with purpose. The question wasn't whether Dr. Magnuson was truly a doctor. It was whether being a doctor was her primary role or merely the cover under which more covert functions could operate. With this in mind, he placed a discreet call to a trusted contact in European intelligence, someone who owed him a favor from past collaborations on regional security threats. Their conversation was brief, peppered with code and colloquialisms designed to evade detection by anyone monitoring communications. But the response he received was enough to confirm what he had already begun to suspect. Dr. Magnuson was real. Her organization was real. But the story she brought with her, the purpose of her mission, wasn't. Dr. Sarah Magnuson was, by all official accounts, a legitimate medical professional. Her credentials were real, her affiliations well documented, and her humanitarian service to conflict zones across the globe was beyond dispute. But a deeper look into her history revealed something far more complex. Her career path consistently intersected with regions undergoing political instability or possessing strategic interest to various intelligence communities. Over the past 5 years, her travel logs showed a peculiar pattern. She often arrived in high-risk zones just before or shortly after major military escalations or pivotal political developments. More curiously still, several of her so-called medical missions had coincided with intelligence operations that, in hindsight, proved instrumental to Western diplomatic or military interventions. She was never named, never photographed with operatives, and never acknowledged in any official reports. But her proximity to events of consequence, time and again, was too regular to dismiss as mere coincidence. The pattern wasn't just consistent, it was deliberate. And it spoke to a degree of operational planning far beyond what any field medic would require. As the golden haze of afternoon gave way to the cool dusk of evening, Dr. Magnuson concluded her equipment setup. With methodical efficiency, she secured each device and cataloged every vial and instrument with professional detachment. Then, with a polite calm that betrayed no hint of fatigue, she requested permission to begin medical screenings the following morning. She claimed she needed rest after her journey and the strenuous unpacking process. Traore nodded, granting her request while taking no chances. He arranged for her to stay in the compound's guest facility, one of the most comfortable quarters available, equipped with every necessity she might require. But her comfort was not his priority. Embedded within those accommodations were discreet security measures, expertly installed to blend seamlessly with the room's furnishings. Rotating guards were stationed nearby, instructed to act as courteous hosts while remaining observant at all times. Their task was twofold: make her feel welcome and never let her out of their sight. Dr. Magnuson, unaware of the net tightening around her, settled into her temporary lodgings as night fell. What she did not know, could not have suspected, was that hidden microphones laced the walls of her room, and trained surveillance teams were monitoring her every move from a control post within the command center. She believed she had a window of solitude. She was wrong. What those surveillance devices recorded over the next several hours would offer more than suspicion. It would provide hard confirmation. Confirmation that Dr. Magnuson was not merely a wandering physician, but part of something much larger and far more dangerous. At exactly 11:30 p.m., long after the compound had sunk into the rhythms of sleep and security rotations, the first anomaly was detected. A spike in localized electronic activity, Precise, concentrated, and unmistakably artificial, originated from her quarters. The surveillance team, trained in electromagnetic pattern recognition, flagged it instantly. The signal was not medical in nature. Hidden beneath the guise of humanitarian tools, Magnuson had activated a compact communications rig, sleek and advanced with no outward markings. The equipment embedded within her belongings was transmitting encrypted data across a secure uplink. The burst transmission lasted for exactly 7 minutes. Silent, invisible to most, but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. When the signal's trajectory was traced, it led to a satellite array operated by a known European intelligence consortium, an entity whose interest in this region had long been the subject of quiet, diplomatic tension. The data she transmitted would later be analyzed frame by frame, byte by byte. Its contents were damning. She had sent detailed schematics of the military compound, layout, structural vulnerabilities, surveillance blind spots, power systems, personnel rotations, and even comms infrastructure. In just 7 minutes, Dr. Magnuson had betrayed more tactical information than a defector could offer in a week of interrogation. And that betrayal, meticulously executed beneath the cover of aid and altruism, was about to ignite consequences far beyond the perimeter walls of the compound. The data that had been captured during the late-night transmission wasn't just incriminating, it was operational gold. Detailed schematics of the compound's infrastructure, surveillance vulnerabilities, defensive rotations, and communication protocols had been streamed to an intelligence satellite. The implications were staggering. Anyone with access to that information would possess a tactical blueprint for disabling or infiltrating Trier's defenses with minimal resistance. But perhaps the most damning discovery was a heavily coded segment embedded in the transmission. A reference to something called Night-Andale Protocol, followed by a chilling status update. Primary target confirmed accessible. This was not the language of a physician. It was the lexicon of a covert operative, executing a precision mission under deep cover. At exactly 3 a.m., Colonel Traore was handed the full intelligence assessment. As he read through the decrypted lines, any lingering doubts he may have had about Dr. Sarah Magnuson's true identity were obliterated. She wasn't simply a spy passing along incidental observations. She was part of a multi-pronged foreign operation designed to evaluate his compound's readiness, map its weaknesses, and prepare for potential direct action. The realization settled over him with grim clarity. She had come not to heal, but to betray. Now the question shifted. This was no longer about identifying the threat. It was about responding to it. Traore knew the wrong reaction could alert her handlers or force her into a defensive posture. But a measured approach, one built on unassailable truth and psychological dominance, would not only expose the full extent of her mission, it would send an unmistakable signal to those who had sent her. There would be no tolerance for subterfuge cloaked in white coats and goodwill. As dawn painted the compound in hues of dusty gold, Dr. Magnuson emerged from her quarters looking rested and composed. She wore the calm expression of a professional ready to serve, greeting every soldier she passed with a warm smile and a compassionate inquiry about their health. Her tone was light, confident, even cheerful. She exuded the air of someone committed to humanitarian ideals, eager to begin the screening procedures she had promised. But Colonel Traore was already waiting. He had reviewed the data. He had formulated a plan. He would not meet deceit with outrage, but with precision. Cold, clinical precision. Dr. Magnuson had just completed setting up what appeared to be a mobile diagnostic station in the medical wing when Traore entered. He was flanked by 2 of his most trusted officers, each of them impassive, their presence calm but charged with authority. She looked up from her work, the same bright expression on her face, unaware that the performance she'd been delivering since arrival was moments away from collapse. "Good morning, Colonel," she said brightly, her tone as smooth as practiced glass. "I'm ready to begin screenings whenever it's convenient for your personnel. I thought we might start with your officers, then move through the general population." Early detection is so important for preventing the spread of potential outbreaks. Traore nodded slowly, his face an unreadable mask. His voice when he spoke was even and measured. "Doctor," he began, "before we begin, I wonder if you might clarify something about your equipment." She tilted her head slightly, giving him a cooperative smile. "Certainly, Colonel. What would you like to know?" He gestured toward her diagnostic setup, which appeared, at least superficially, to be the standard fare for any medical field station. But Traore wasn't concerned with what was visible on the examination table. His interest lay in what had been assembled the night before, away from view. "I'm curious," he said, "about the device you assembled around 11:30 last night. The one with the multiple antenna arrays. The one that transmitted data for exactly 7 minutes to coordinates associated with European satellite communication networks. There was a flicker then. Subtle but unmistakable." Her smile held, but something shifted behind her eyes. A silent recalculation. A flicker of recognition. She realized in that instant that something had gone wrong. Her transmission had been intercepted. Her cover, possibly compromised. "I'm not sure what you mean, Colonel," she replied, her tone unfaltering, though there was now a new tightness beneath it, like a violin string pulled taut. "I didn't use any communication equipment last night. I was simply preparing my medical supplies and reviewing patient screening protocols." Without a word, Traore walked to the examination table where a large supply crate still sat, exactly as she had left it after unpacking. With deliberate care, he removed the top layer of genuine medical supplies. Antiseptics, gauze rolls, blood pressure monitors. Each item he handled with quiet reverence, the way a soldier might touch the relics of fallen comrades, aware that beneath them, deception lay waiting. "Doctor, I have great respect for medical professionals who dedicate their lives to helping others," Colonel Traore said calmly as he continued unpacking the crate. His voice carried the weight of experience and sincerity, but there was also a current of restrained judgment beneath the surface. "My own sister is a nurse. She served in refugee camps across West Africa, Zwedru, Gbarnga, and beyond. I understand the dedication and sacrifice that true humanitarian work demands." Dr. Magnuson watched him warily, tension creeping into her posture as he worked his way deeper into the supply crate. Her hands, which moments ago had been steady and purposeful, now trembled slightly at her sides. She had known this moment could come, but not this soon, and not like this. "Colonel, I appreciate your respect for the profession," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "But I'm not sure why you're examining my supplies in this manner." "Because," Traore replied flatly, lifting away the final layer of gauze-wrapped materials to reveal what had been concealed beneath, "I believe you are insulting the memory of every genuine humanitarian who has ever risked their life to help others, by using their noble work as a cover for espionage." The moment the last piece of fabric was pulled away, the crate gave up its secret. Sleek black equipment with compact antenna arrays, data routing consoles, and encrypted communications interfaces lay exposed like a coiled snake. The gear wasn't medical, it was operational, and its design left no room for ambiguity. This was not the domain of NGOs or emergency medical teams. This was the unmistakable signature of high-level intelligence apparatus. Dr. Magnuson's eyes locked onto the equipment, her mind calculating escape vectors, diplomatic consequences, damage control. Her training kicked in, urging calm and redirection, but she could feel the iron grip of inevitability tightening around her. She was caught, no longer theoretically compromised, but exposed, irrevocably. "Colonel, I can explain," she began, her voice soft but steady, reaching for the thread of plausibility she still hoped to spin. But Traore raised his hand, palm out, stopping her mid-sentence. "Doctor, or whoever you actually are," he said, his tone now edged with quiet fury and disappointment. "I'm going to give you an opportunity you don't deserve. I will allow you to tell me the truth, your mission, your objectives, and the organization you represent. If you choose to lie again, I will release this evidence to international media outlets. Let the world decide the nature of your actions." The room grew heavy with silence. The facade she had so carefully maintained since arriving at the compound was crumbling, not under torture or hostility, but under something far more effective: evidence and patience. She had prepared for extraction scenarios, hostile detainment, even counter-interrogation. But she had not anticipated someone like Traore, composed, deeply informed, and morally deliberate. "What evidence?" she asked cautiously, stalling for precious seconds as her brain cycled through failing contingency plans. Without responding, Traore nodded to one of his officers. The man stepped forward, handing over a thick folder brimming with documentation. Photographs, intercepts, transcripts, communication logs. Dr. Magnuson's fingers tensed as the file was opened in front of her. "Satellite imagery," Traore said, flipping to the first high-resolution image. "Your transmission equipment being deployed, captured at 23:38 hours, angle of satellite orbit 142, matching coordinates of the platform used, EUCOM strategic net." Another page turned. Electronic intercepts, coded messages sent from this compound to multiple servers routed through European proxy networks. Here's the decoded message initiating something called Night Andale Protocol. Primary target confirmed accessible. Those aren't words a doctor uses. Another page. Analysis of data packets. You transmitted personnel manifests, compound infrastructure layouts, and defensive protocols. Every piece tailored for military value. The weight of the truth pressed down on her shoulders. The folder was a surgical strike against her cover. Each document a bullet that tore through the illusion she had maintained. It was not just detailed, it was devastatingly complete. "But perhaps most damning," Traore added, meeting her eyes now, "we have audio and visual surveillance from the moment you arrived. Every conversation, every movement, every transmission, all documented, all reviewed, all analyzed." Dr. Magnuson's knees gave slightly as she sank into a nearby chair. Her poise, so polished and controlled, faltered. The years of training, the psychological armor, the mission discipline, all buckled under the weight of total exposure. She looked up at Traore not as a covert operative, not as a humanitarian worker, but as a human being standing before the truth with nowhere left to run. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice stripped of its earlier confidence. She wasn't negotiating now, she was surviving. "I want the truth," Traore said simply, his tone devoid of cruelty but equally absent of leniency. "Who sent you? What was your mission? What organization do you represent? And what were your actual objectives in infiltrating this compound?" The stillness that followed was thick with consequence. In that moment, she realized she had only 3 choices: deny everything and insult the intelligence of the man who now held her fate, attempt a negotiation that could collapse before it began, or accept the brutal clarity of her situation and attempt to reclaim some measure of control by telling the truth. Finally, after several long seconds of silence, her shoulders slumped. "My name is Sarah Magnus," she said, her voice barely audible. "I am a medical doctor, and I have worked with humanitarian organizations." That part was true. Traore said nothing, allowing her the space to continue. "But you're right. That's not why I'm here." The admission hung in the air like the final piece of a long-studied puzzle snapping into place. Traore didn't press her. He didn't gloat. He simply waited, knowing that the next words could change everything. Because now the real interrogation would begin. "I work for a European intelligence consortium that monitors political and military developments in regions of strategic interest," Dr. Magnuson confessed, her voice low, each word dragging behind a weight of consequence. It was as if every sentence cost her a part of the carefully constructed persona she had spent years perfecting. My medical background offers excellent cover. It allows me to enter sensitive zones, interact freely, and collect intelligence that traditional operatives could never hope to access through conventional methods. Colonel Traore, ever composed, leaned forward slightly. "What was your specific mission here?" he asked, his tone firm but devoid of malice. Magnuson hesitated, but the futility of denial had already settled in. She took a breath, her posture sagging under the burden of admission. "To assess your compound's defensive capabilities," she said. "To document your personnel, catalog your equipment, and identify vulnerabilities, weak points that could be exploited in future operations." The confession hung in the air like a pall, its implications chilling. This had never been just a passive intelligence-gathering operation. This was groundwork, meticulous preparation for the possibility of future military or covert action against Traore and his command. The room seemed to darken with the gravity of her words. "Future operations of what nature?" Traore pressed, the sharp edge of strategy now creeping into his voice. Magnuson looked up at him then, her expression a mixture of fatigue and reluctant admiration for the man who had so expertly dismantled her cover. "I don't know the specifics," she admitted. "My job wasn't to plan, only to observe, to report. But I do know that the data I was gathering would have been critical to any force considering intervention or hostile engagement with your compound." A silence followed that admission, thick, grim, undeniable. The realization struck everyone present with brutal clarity. Someone had been preparing for war, and Dr. Magnuson had been the scout sent to draw the map. "Who authorized this mission?" Traore asked, his voice low and measured, though it bore the unmistakable weight of command. "I can't tell you that," she said, her spine straightening just a little. A flicker of the old resolve returned to her voice. "Whatever punishment I face for being discovered, it would be nothing compared to the consequences of revealing operational details or compromising the identities of those behind this mission." Traore studied her for a long moment. He respected her loyalty, twisted though it was, but he also understood what her refusal meant. It limited his ability to resolve the matter quietly. It meant that someone else, some powerful group behind the curtain, was betting that he would simply let this slide. But that was not who Traore was. "Doctor," he said, tone calm, deliberate, "I'm going to offer you one final opportunity to reconsider your position. You have been caught conducting espionage against a sovereign military installation. The evidence against you is comprehensive and damning. Unless you provide full cooperation, your mission, your handlers, your organization, I will release this information to international media. Let the world see what your so-called humanitarian cover truly hides." For a moment, Dr. Magnuson's eyes flickered, not with fear but calculation. Her training reasserted itself, the professional instincts that had kept her safe in war zones and hostile nations snapping back into place. She shook her head slowly, voice cold but resolute. "I cannot and will not disclose information that could compromise active operations or endanger the lives of others still in the field. That's not negotiable, no matter the consequences." Traore exhaled, unsurprised. He had hoped she would choose differently, but in truth, he had expected this outcome. "Then we proceed to the next phase," he said. He turned and signaled to his officers, who immediately began setting up high-definition video recording equipment. They moved with professional efficiency, silent and coordinated, as if they'd rehearsed this scenario before. There was no anger in their movements, only duty. Dr. Magnuson's eyes widened as the implications of what was about to happen hit her. "Colonel, please reconsider," she said, urgency rising in her voice. "If you release this footage, it will destroy my reputation, end my career. It could place my family in danger, and worse, it might undermine the legitimacy of real humanitarian missions. People doing actual good who have nothing to do with intelligence work could be harmed." Traore turned back to her, his expression as unyielding as stone. "Doctor," he said, his voice stripped of any softness, "those are consequences you should have considered long before you accepted a mission that used humanitarian aid as camouflage for espionage." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth, now laid bare, carried all the weight necessary. "Your actions don't just compromise your own integrity," Traore said, his voice stern but composed. "They endanger every legitimate aid worker who operates in regions like this by creating suspicion and distrust toward genuine humanitarian efforts." The recording equipment was now fully operational. Multiple cameras had been positioned to capture every angle. Traore's firm presence and Dr. Magnussen's increasingly pale and solemn face. What was unfolding would serve as irrefutable documentation of a sophisticated espionage operation masked as humanitarian aid. "Ladies and gentlemen," Traore began, turning directly to the lens with the calm authority that had earned him both loyalty and fear throughout the region. "What you are about to see is evidence of a covert intelligence mission. A mission that manipulated humanitarian aid as a front to conduct espionage activities against a sovereign military installation." He gestured toward the silent woman beside him. Dr. Sarah Magnussen sat still, her expression frozen as the full weight of exposure settled on her shoulders. There was no room left for negotiation or retreat. "This woman came to our compound under the name Doctor Sarah Magnussen," he continued. "She claimed to represent the International Medical Relief Coalition, offering emergency medical support in response to a supposed outbreak of disease. Her credentials appeared authentic. Her story was believable. Her mission aligned at first glance with real humanitarian concerns." Traore moved deliberately toward the examination table where various pieces of her gear were now laid bare under the cold scrutiny of lights and cameras. "But our investigation quickly revealed something else entirely," he said, lifting one of the devices from the table. A concealed transmitter no larger than a credit card, sleek and matte black. No disease outbreak had been reported. No request for medical assistance was ever filed with regional health authorities. And this equipment here, it's not for treating patients, it's for surveillance. Covert transmission of classified information. He held the device closer to the camera. She was transmitting sensitive data, our defensive capabilities, our personnel numbers, our operational layout, to European intelligence networks. Under cover of night, using advanced satellite communication. Magnussen's composure began to crack. Her mission had not just failed, it had collapsed in spectacular fashion, with every detail of her operation now being dismantled and broadcast. Her medical cover, her years of humanitarian work, her network, all disintegrating under the weight of this public reckoning. "The individual responsible for this operation," Traore said, gesturing to her once more, "has admitted that she is indeed a medical doctor with a history of service in humanitarian crises. But she has also acknowledged, under direct questioning, that her primary purpose here was to collect intelligence. Intelligence that could be used in future operations against this facility." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to land with finality. "This is not just an isolated betrayal, it is a dangerous form of deception that undermines the foundation of humanitarian aid worldwide. When intelligence agencies exploit humanitarian cover, they turn trust into a weapon. They jeopardize every real doctor, every nurse, every field worker who enters conflict zones with nothing but good intentions. This cannot be tolerated." Magnussen sat motionless, the weight of her choices etched across her face. As the cameras continued to record, Traore delivered the closing blow. "The footage and materials you see here will be shared with international media. The world has a right to know how aid missions are being weaponized for covert agendas. This exposure is not an act of revenge. It is an act of accountability for every soul who risks their life in true service of others." The recording concluded with slow, deliberate documentation of all equipment, falsified credentials, encrypted files, and tools that revealed the full scope of the espionage operation. There was no ambiguity. The narrative was airtight. The betrayal undeniable. Within hours, the footage began circulating through diplomatic channels, independent news agencies, and major online platforms. The response was immediate. Hashtags surged. Journalists dissected every frame. Global audiences reacted with a mix of shock, outrage, and grave concern. The ethics of intelligence gathering had been thrown into public debate, this time with faces, names, and evidence to match. Dr. Sarah Magnuson, now a disgraced operative, was quietly repatriated to Europe through closed diplomatic negotiations. Her career, both in medicine and intelligence, had come to a humiliating end. Officially, the organizations she had worked for denied any knowledge of her espionage activities. Privately, however, they conceded that one of their most skilled operatives had been neutralized. And not just neutralized, publicly dismantled by a leader they had vastly underestimated. But the impact of the incident extended far beyond the personal consequences for Dr. Magnuson. Traoré's decisive handling of the situation sent an unmistakable message to global intelligence communities. Any mission that dares to exploit the sanctity of humanitarian work would not be buried under quiet diplomacy. It would be exposed, loudly, methodically, and without hesitation. The professionalism and clarity of Traoré's public statement and the detailed evidence provided forced analysts and agencies to reassess their approach to intelligence work in the region. His compound was no longer just a military outpost. It was now a fortress of credibility, a place where deception met its match and false angels were stripped of their wings. For legitimate aid organizations, the fallout was painful. Their ability to operate in volatile zones had been dealt a blow. Governments, militias, and communities began to look upon humanitarian efforts with a new suspicion. And while many condemned Dr. Magnuson's choices, the greater tragedy was the erosion of trust she had helped unleash. Most significantly, the story reshaped Traoré's global reputation. No longer merely a regional commander, he was now viewed as a strategist, capable of outmaneuvering even the most sophisticated intelligence operations. His mixture of patience, scrutiny, and moral clarity became a model for leaders facing similar threats disguised under peaceful guises. The story of Dr. Sarah Magnuson's failed mission soon circulated through clandestine circles as a cautionary tale. Intelligence training academies around the world began incorporating her case into their curriculum, not as a warning against espionage, but as a lesson in the new level of resistance operatives might face in the field. Years later, intelligence historians would call the Magnuson affair a turning point. It marked the moment where deception met accountability, and where the lines between warfare and humanitarian work became dangerously and permanently blurred. The white plastic crate that once held her bandages, syringes, and digital stethoscope was now stored under lock and key, not as medical inventory, but as evidence. A grim trophy of an operation that mistook compassion for a weakness and found instead the unflinching eyes of a commander who would not be fooled. In the compound where it all began, soldiers still tell the story of that day, of the woman who came with the smile of an angel and left with the mask of a devil torn from her face, of the commander who saw through it all, a tale passed from one watch post to another, not just as history, but as warning. What would you have done in Traoré's position? Should intelligence agencies be held publicly accountable for using humanitarian cover in their operations? Tell us in the comments. And if this story gave you a new perspective on the hidden battlegrounds of modern espionage, subscribe now for more stories that expose the truths behind the world's most dangerous games.